Good morning, Chairman. I'm a small shareholder and a proxy holder for 209 other shareholders, holding 460,000 shares. I've just got one brief question at the outset. When you did your capital raising late last year, I think it was December, you raised $3 billion through an institutional placement at $20 a share, so you issued 150 million new shares. And then you announced you were going to do a share purchase plan which you announced was limited to only $250 million worth of shares. Now, at the time, the bank was broadly 60% owned by institutional shareholders and 40% owned by retail shareholders. Yet you came up with a capital raising structure which proposed limiting the retail shareholders to only 7.7% of the total capital raised. Fast forward to today, and those lucky institutions are enjoying paper profits of $1.2 billion on their $3 billion investment, and the investors who did participate in the share purchase plan are enjoying profits of $98 million only. Now, I know you will say, and I acknowledge, that retail investors only asked for $247 million worth of shares, so there is no issue there. The issue is, why did you impose that cap? Why did you construct the offer so that even if you had been deluged in that offer with $2 billion worth of applications, which would have reflected the pro rata 40% entitlement, seeing your record in subsequent issues, you would have returned $1.75 billion to the retail investors and said, no, we don't want your money. So why did you settle on a cap of only $250 million in that capital raising for retail investors 12 months ago?
Thanks, Mr. Mayne. Well, the answer is very straightforward. At the time, the bank decided that it needed $3.25 billion worth of capital, and we then had a decision as to how much of that to raise through a placement and how much through an SPP. I mentioned earlier today, not all of you are here today at the interview, why we chose a placement SPP route in both occasions in the last year. And for those who weren't here, let me just briefly say that the question of a rights issue really wasn't on this year because of the risks facing banks who did attempt to do rights issues, some of whom ended up in the hands of the government in the UK. And it was deemed by our board and by the boards of all the banks in Australia that a placement SPP was a safer way to go in terms of securing the bank and also giving shareholders the ability to participate. So having decided that we wanted to get $3.25 billion of capital, we had the decision as to what proportion of that should be in the placement. If we'd done, as you said, and made 40% of it or 38% of it the SPP and the other 63% in the placement, we would have failed dismally. We took a judgment as to what the retail shareholders may have been willing to subscribe, and so we said, in the current circumstances, we think $250 million might be the limit of what they might subscribe. So that means we'd better raise $3 billion through the placement, which we did. In the event, the retail shareholders who could have applied for, because they could apply for up to $15,000 worth each, could have applied for $2.5 billion worth of shares, applied for $247 million, just below the notional cap that we'd put on it. And so the judgment about what they might be prepared to provide was correct. You can imagine what would have happened if we'd said, well, let's raise $1.9 billion in the placement and $1.4 billion in the SPP. We would have received applications for $247 million. We would have been $1.2 billion short of capital. We would have been pilloried in the press. The ratings agencies would have come in and said, you now have a limited or a reduced ability to raise equity capital, and we're going to put you on credit watch, with all of the spiralling effects that those things have. And so there's no doubt that the decisions taken then were right. You mentioned the gains that the institutions received who subscribed for the $3 billion. With respect, I think it is rather misleading of you to do that. Any shareholder who didn't subscribe in that issue had the ability in the following 4 months to acquire shares on the market at 20% less than the issue price, that is down to 16 and a bit dollars, and would have made considerably more profit than the institutions who stood behind us at that time and provided the $3 billion.